Alright, welcome back. Now, in the previous few videos, we've talked about databases, how they work, and even played about an Airtable one. And if you haven't had the chance already, I would recommend pausing this video, go and trying out Airtable yourself, and just making sure you're comfortable with how it works. However, in this video, we're going to talk about relationships, and these are a mega crucial part of any no-code app, and one of the main things that you need to focus on getting right, because if you get it right at the start, it's going to stop you having big problems, when you're 10, 15, 20 hours, days, weeks into building your app out. So a relationship is essentially a way of connecting two tables together so that the records within each of those tables can share, connect, link between each other. And as a kind of example based on a database we looked at before, we had this idea of a t-shirt printing e-commerce website. It would have customers, it would have orders, it would have inventory. And so for the customer, we specified address and that kind of information. For order, we kind of put in the order number and the date it was placed. And for the inventory, we put in a series of different in-stock items like t-shirts and hoodies. The bit that we didn't do is connect them together, because if you think about it, right, for every order, we need to know who placed it. We need to know which customer from our customer table made that order happen. And similarly, for each order, we need to know which items were part of that order, and we store that in our inventory table. So we need to find a way of pulling them through. And so the way that a database would handle this kind of situation is essentially by creating a relationship between each of these tables, and then allowing the records between them to connect and to make their data accessible to each other. So what we're going to do in a wee second, we are just going to have a look at how that works on Airtable, and then we're going to come back to the slides and I'm going to talk you through some of the complexities of relationships, because there are quite a few complexities, there are a few things that you need to think about and get right, but we're going to look at an example of it, we're going to talk through it, and then later, a few lessons from now, I'm also going to show you my personal method for how I map out relationships, think about them, and make sure that I get them right in my very own app. Alright, so we are back in Airtable as before. Now, you'll probably recognise this from our previous video, however, I have taken the liberty of fleshing out some of the tables, just making sure they've got all the information we need. So, as I mentioned, we're kind of at the point where we've got customer details, we've got some order details, and we've got inventory details. Let's look at how we can use a relationship to connect them together and paint a fuller picture. So, if I come in here and create a new column, immediately at the very top, Airtable gives me this option to link to another record. In other words, to create a relationship. So let's hit that. Now I'm going to call this items, and you'll see that it's immediately pulled through the other tables on the database. I've got customers, I've got inventory. Now we're going to start with inventory. And you'll see I've got this little option here, allow linking to multiple records. We'll come back to that in a wee minute, but it's a way to kind of change the type of relationship you're creating. We're going to create the field, and we're immediately going to be asked for lookup fields. Let's skip that, I'm going to come back to that as well. So immediately what happens here is we get this extra column for all of our records, and I'm able to now assign items to the records from the inventory table. So let's click this little plus button, and you can see there's a bunch of different options we've got here, and they look very familiar because we're looking at existing records which are already in the inventory table. So let's go ahead and we're going to specify, let me recreate the outfit that I'm wearing, which is a black t-shirt and a white hoodie. We'll click black t-shirt and we'll go for the white hoodie. Now, if you look at them, immediately they're connected there. If I jump into the inventory, I can see that there's now a new order column that's been created, and that specifies the order numbers associated with these t-shirts. So if I pop back to orders, if I click that, you'll then see it pulls all that data through. So you can see it says record from the inventory. It's going to tell me from the inventory how many items are still in stock. And actually you can already see there's a link here back to the record of the order. So there's this whole kind of a loop created where my order can now access the relevant records in the inventory, and the inventory can now access this order record. So that's brilliant. We've kind of got one part of the picture here. But now we need to know who placed the order, not just what they've got. So we're going to hit this. We're going to just type in customer. Let's do customer who placed order, just to make it a little bit clearer. And again, we're going to do a relationship. Now this time we're going to obviously link to customers. I'm going to do something a bit different here. I'm going to untick allow linking to multiple records. And the reason I'm going to do that is within relationships, we have two primary types of relationships. There are a few others, but two main ones that we care about. There's a one-to-many relationship, a one-to-many, or there are many-to-many relationships. And in the kind of following few minutes, once we went through this Airtable exercise, I'm going to take you through the complexities of those and what they mean. But let's whip it up and see what happens. So we create a field, and this lookup part is going to come up again. Now, if we actually have a look at what this is saying, essentially what this is going to let us do is pull information onto this record from other linked records. Now, let's say we've got name, address and email, which is clearly from a customer record. I'm going to put the address in here. So we see this column appear. Okay, so far so good. Now we want to specify a customer who's placed this order, and if I just pop back to customers, you'll see an order column has appeared, but I've not specified a customer yet, and so as a result there's nothing here. So let's go ahead and fill that. I've got, as you would expect, the options from the previous table. I can put John Smith, Joe, Jane. Let's just put John at the top. Now what you'll immediately notice is his address is pulled through, and so that's brilliant. You know, if I'm using this to, let's say, run fulfillment for my t-shirt e-commerce company, I can immediately see every order, when it was placed, what items are meant to be in it, who it's for, and I've got their address there and then. So presumably I could use this one screen to run the entire fulfillment of my business. Now you'll notice if I go in here back to items, I've already added two records in there, and I've got the option to add a third record if I so choose. So I can add no-code t-shirt. But if I go into customer, I can't add anything more, and that's because this is not allowing multiple records to be linked. And there's a simple reason for that, right? If you think about it, an order can only be placed by one person. You know, yes, two people can place very similar orders of the same things, but only one person with that name and that address can place an order for those things at their own home. So we don't really want to allow multiple customers to be assigned to one order number, because we're only going to send it to one person. On the other hand though, a customer, let's take John Smith, okay, he's placed order 1, 2, 3 today, but he could come back and place another order. You know, if we have a look at our orders and let's say, right, 1, 2, 4, and we're going to say it's for a no-code t-shirt, I liked his first one that much, he's got another one, we can then say, okay, John Smith ordered this. And if I flick back, now John's got two orders against him, and that's because what we've created is a one-to-many relationship. In other words, an order can only have one customer, but a customer can have many or multiple orders. And so, you know, we can go through here, we can add a little bit more, we can say, okay, Jane Smith did this order, we can put more t-shirts in there, let's put, you know, white hoodie, etc. And there's all sorts of things you could do to enhance this, right? I mean, if I wanted to order 2 black t-shirts, I can't currently do that because I've already linked that record, but I could pull through the stock count and say, okay, I actually want 2 of this item, etc. Tons of stuff you can do to make this more complex, but what you can immediately see is we're pulling through data from other records, we've got links to other records, and you can quickly see how this can build up, you know, a nice, powerful but complicated feature for your apps. Now, Airtable is one example of many no-code tools, but almost every no-code tool out there that's going to let you build an app of your choosing is going to let you do this in its own way. They might have different terminology for it, they might have different words for it, but you know, broadly, this is the basics of how you link data between each other. Now, we've just sat and done that manually. If you were building an app, then you're going to build workflows that we'll explore in the next chapter that are going to help you get the data in there, get the right data in there, make it all work. But this is a basic view of how your database can store this information, store it in relation to each other, and just really start to build something pretty powerful. So what I'm just going to do is pop back into the slides and we're going to talk a wee bit more about some of the complexities of relationships. Alright, we're back in our favourite place, these slides. So, going to start this next bit off with just a bit of a, I'm not sure if this is a warning or a lesson or what it is, but data relationships can absolutely make or break your app. Now, I touched on this a little bit before, but I just want to be really clear about it because it's so important. You know, one of the things I've talked about consistently so far is that the whole point of going to the effort of learning all this rather than just jumping on a how-to video that explains, you know, the thing closest to your idea is because if you understand this, it's going to save you a ton of pain down the line. So many people come to me or come to NoCode.Tech and suggest that they've had an issue, or they've been building something, they've been working on it for weeks, you know, and eventually something's went wrong, something doesn't work the way they planned and they can't figure it out. And often that's because the underlying relationships are either not correct, or they didn't take the time to build up the knowledge about how relationships work so that they can make them effective and make them work for the future. So you absolutely have to make sure you get your data model right from the start. You have to make sure that you know exactly what you're putting in there, exactly how it's going to work. And I know that will sound a little bit scary, but as I mentioned earlier, as I mentioned later, I'm going to show you how you can kind of draw them out, how they work, and we'll cover that in a separate lesson. But for now, let's kind of understand the complexities of them and some of the different nuances. So I kind of mentioned we've got a couple of types of relationship. One of them is a one-to-many relationship, and the other is a many-to-many relationship. Now, anybody watching this who's got previous experiences with database will immediately say, what about a one-to-one relationship? And the reason I've left that out is because in many instances you either don't need it or a no-code tool doesn't allow it. Airtable, for example, doesn't really allow it. It only allows a one-to-many, and the reason for that is anything that can be a one-to-many relationship can kind of also be a one-to-one relationship as well. So you can use them. I've decided for the purposes of this, I'm going to leave out a one-to-one relationship because I think it's just extra knowledge you don't need at the minute. So let's dive into a one-to-many relationship. It's a lot more interesting and a lot more flexible. So what we set up when we did our orders and customers was a one-to-many relationship. We said that an order can only have one customer, but a customer can have many orders. And the real idea there is just to make sure that your data is controlled, that you have it accessible, and almost that you can predict how that's going to look. You know, I don't want to have to build an app where I've got to worry that I might have an order with multiple customers on it. I can cut that problem off right at the source by just saying it's not possible, it's sent to database, this is how it's going to work. And you know, this isn't a massive problem for you today, but in the future, if your no-code app does really well, you've got, you know, thousands of users, millions of users, getting these relationships right is also just going to help it work a little bit better, a bit cleaner, a bit faster, and you're not going to have to deal with things going down or breaking all the time. So we've covered that example of you know, a customer can have multiple orders, an order can have one customer. As another example, just to bring that to life, I've put down the bottom here, you know, look at a book. One book can have many pages, but every page in the world only belongs to one book. You can't have a page that belongs to two books at the same time unless you're in Harry Potter. So, you know, it's a really good example of a one-to-many relationship and how that works. And actually, if you look on the right here, we've got this little chart. It's from Adalo, mobile app builder, depending on where you are on the lesson flow, you might have already seen it. But one of my favourite tools, and one of the reasons I love it, is when you start building out your database and you try to specify a database relationship, it pops up this little chart. And in this case, it's looking at restaurants and menus. And so it kind of lists out the 3 questions. And I think these are really important because when I'm thinking about how a relationship is going to be in a database, I often just say it out loud in exactly this way. So I'll say, you know, okay, a restaurant can have multiple menus, but a menu belongs to one restaurant. Does that sound right? A restaurant can only have one menu, but a menu can have multiple restaurants. Does that sound right? And a menu can have multiple restaurants, but a restaurant can have multiple menus. And so there's a couple of things to keep in mind here. You know, number one, this is a great way of trying to just vocalize what your relationships are and figure out which one sounds right. But, you know, there's either going to be one or two thoughts in your head when you watch this. You're either going to go, yeah, a restaurant can definitely have multiple menus, but a menu can only be one restaurant. Or you're going to think, well, you know, menus can be any restaurant, they can copy them, etc. And this is one of the tricky things about computers, which is lots of things are treated as a singular. It is true that one menu could be copied again and again at different restaurants, but when we're thinking about how computers work and how data is stored, we're only going to have one menu that's assigned, we're going to have a menu that's assigned to one restaurant only because it's that restaurant's menu. They created it, it's theirs. Someone can copy it and it might be exactly the same, it might look exactly the same, but it's still not their menu. It's still a different, completely different object. In the same way, I could have a painting, you could photocopy that painting, or maybe a print makes better sense, but you could photocopy that. And you might have something that looks exactly the same, but it's still a fundamentally different object. My piece of paper's here and your piece of paper's there. That's a really important concept to get in your head and conceptualize, because it's not only something that we'll deal with again and again as we go through this, but it's something that is one of the trickiest kind of mindset switches people make when they go from non-technical to technical. And if that already sounds really intuitive to you, that's a good sign, because it means all of this is going to be a lot easier for you than you might think. And now to go back to the chart, in terms of which statement is the right one, to me it's the first statement. A restaurant can have multiple menus, because you could have a breakfast menu, you could have a dinner menu, a dessert menu, etc. But all those menus are only that restaurant's menu. So that's a really good way of kind of visualising it and explaining it. But I think it brings out another interesting thing, which is a one-to-many relationship has a direction. You know, if we look at our customer customer and order example from earlier, we said, you know, one customer, multiple orders, one order, one customer. And that direction is so important, because if we had set that up on the other table and said, and taken off that multiple linked records on the customer, then what would have happened is we would have allowed a customer to only have one order ever, whereas we'd have allowed every order to have an infinite number of customers or many customers. And so that direction is important. The customer was the one and the order was the many. If we had accidentally set the order as the one and the customer as the many, that would have been totally wrong. It would have broke our system. And so therefore, getting that direction is really important. And I really like Hidalgo's chart here, because it just kind of brings that out and helps you understand how that direction is so important. So now that you kind of hopefully understand that a little bit, and I know it's complex, but let's move on to many. And as we kind of go through the whole lessons, you know, there's not only going to be a lot of times where we come back to these relationships and think about them, but throughout our whole content library, these are going to be a recurring theme again and again. So plenty of places to get practice and kind of figure out, you know, different examples, because this will take a while to get your head around. So let's look at a many-to-many. Now, in some ways, this is a bit simpler, even though it looks complex. You know, the minute you spot that diagram in the bottom left-hand corner there, you're probably thinking, oh dear. But don't worry, let me explain it. So a many-to-many relationship is kind of this idea that if we had our two tables, you know, many records in one can link to many records in the other. So imagine a customer could place as many orders as they like, and an order could have as many customers as they like. Now that doesn't make too much sense in our t-shirt store example, but let me give you one that does, which is the inventory. So if you think about it, an order can have as many inventory items as it likes. You know, I could go on the Levi's website and order every single pair of jeans that they have, and nothing would stop me, I imagine, other than my bank account. On the other hand, those jeans could be part of many orders. I might go and buy a pair of 511 black jeans today. You know, it could easily be possible that another 500, 1,000 people will do the same today. And so as a result, an inventory has a many relationship to many orders. And so we have this idea of many to many. Now that's kind of what I've drawn out down here. And it looks really, really complex, because I've got an arrow connecting every single order to every single inventory record. Now in practice that probably wouldn't happen, because it's unlikely that anyone ever goes on the Levi's website, for example, and orders every single pair of jeans, and it's almost impossible that every single person who places an order on the Levi's website is going to order everything. So that kind of chart doesn't, you know, if you're actually drawing it for a real app, it's not really going to look like that. But the idea is, it's possible, you know. It is possible that every order could have every inventory item, and every inventory item could have every order. So it's just one thing to keep in mind, but let me bring it back to a more kind of practical example. I got this one from Airtable, their own website. It's really, really good, got lots of great information that might even help you understand these relationships in a bit more detail. But it's given this idea of, imagine you had an app, and that app was for you know, tracking students, what classes they went to, what classes were on, etc. You would have, within your app, you'd probably have a table for students, you'd probably have a table for classes, you might even have one for teachers and whatever else as well. And so if you think about it, again, let's say this out loud, a student can attend many classes, my class can also have many students. Does that sound right? I would say so, because I could be going to maths, could be going to English, philosophy. At the same time, every one of those classes is going to have multiple students. You're going to have 20, 30 people attending the class. So that's a great example of a many-to-many relationship. However, if we want to kind of contrast that to a one-to-many, think about teachers. You know, a teacher is going to have one class it's the other way around. A teacher is going to teach many classes throughout the course of a day. They might teach 4 or 5 courses today or this week. At the same time, every class is only going to have one teacher at a time. You know, it's going to be very hard for 3 people to teach a class at the same time as each other. And so therefore, every individual class can have one teacher only. And again, let's go back to that kind of that singular, unique concept there. Yes, there can be multiple classes all running in parallel. Yes, they can all have multiple teachers, different teachers. But every class is an individual class, every teacher is an individual person, every student's an individual person. So it's just really good to keep that kind of, you know, that idea in your head when you're trying to think about these relationships and data structures. So we'll go ahead and put this all together now. In the previous video, we looked at the example of Airbnb. If you haven't seen that yet, give this a quick pause, maybe check that out. But as a quick explanation, you know, on Airbnb, if you own an apartment, you can go on there, you can rent it out, a visitor can come on, they can book your apartment, they can book a stay at your apartment, that'll get you paid, they'll come, they'll stay, they'll leave a review, kind of done. So kind of got a little bit of a diagram about how this might look on the left in terms of a database. Again, it may look a little bit complex, but it's actually pretty simple. So the idea is we would have 5 different tables: a visitors table, a stays table, an apartments table, a host table, and the reviews table. And then let me just, I've kind of put this down the right so you can read along, but let me just go through every relationship and sort of just verbalise that. So, you know, a host is going to have a one-to-many relationship with an apartment, and that makes sense, right? Because, you know, I might own this apartment, I might own several, I can put them all on Airbnb, but every apartment that I own is only going to have one owner, which is me. Now again, back to that idea of unique, you know, singular. In theory, yes, could I co-own an apartment with a friend or with a partner? Absolutely, I could. But in Airbnb, I'm the only person as the host who is going to log in, upload that apartment, and therefore it's my apartment. So, you know, it's always good as well, I think, when you're designing a database, to just keep it simple and not go to complexity if you don't have to. You know, chances are in Airbnb, one person's going to own one flat, so just keep it a nice, simple, one-to-many relationship. Don't make it too complex. Now, on the other hand, a visitor, if we make this a little bit more complex, a visitor can have multiple stays, and a stay can have multiple visitors. Now, the way we're defining a stay is a booking almost, you know. The visitor says, I want to stay in this apartment between these 2 dates, and I'm going to pay X amount of money to do that. That's different from the apartment. The apartment is a separate entity, a separate thing that exists over here. All we know is this stay is going to happen at that apartment. And so as a result, a visitor can have multiple stays, right? Because a visitor can use Airbnb today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, book as many stays as they like. And on the other hand, quite often what happens in Airbnb is I'll decide I want to book somewhere with friends, we'll all log in, we'll book the same place together, and as a result, a visitor can have multiple stays, and a stay can have multiple visitors attending at the same time. Now, if you go back to that host example, if we wanted to keep stays simple, we could also say that it could be a one-to-many relationship, in the sense that a visitor can have many stays, but a stay can only have one visitor. And the reason we would do that is if we were just saying we don't really care about group booking right now, that's too advanced, we just want one person booking a stay. Even if they're bringing 5 of their friends along, one person's logging in and booking it, and therefore it's a one-to-many relationship. And so when you think about it, a stay can only have one apartment, which is because when I book on Airbnb, I can only stay in one place. I don't book 5 Airbnbs into the one stay. I might have my own trip in my head, and I've booked 5 places. I'm going to go to one, then the other, then the other. But for a stay on Airbnb, Airbnb is only thinking about one person, books, gets one apartment for X length of time, and then they leave. And so a stay is only going to have one apartment, but an apartment can have multiple stays, because if this is my flat and I've got 5 people staying here every single month, that's going to be 5 different stays, and therefore it's a one-to-many relationship between the stay and the apartment. Now, an apartment can have multiple reviews, so if I'm a guest, I've just stayed at an apartment, I'm pretty happy with it, or maybe I'm not happy, I'm going to leave a review. There might be 5 people again who've stayed in the apartment this month, and therefore there's going to be 5 reviews. But every review can only be about one apartment. I can't write a review that's about 2 different apartments. Yes, I can write 2 different reviews about 2 different apartments, but the one review that I type and put onto Airbnb can only be about 1 apartment at a time. Therefore, we have a one-to-many relationship, or based on the way I've written this down, a many-to-one relationship. Again, it's about that direction. That direction is really, really important. However, the one thing that we're going to say here is that a review also has a relationship with one visitor, which is the person writing the review. But a visitor, again, they can leave as many reviews as they like, because they're going to go to one apartment, they're going to leave a review there, they're going to go to another one, they're going to leave a review there. And this is where we start to get into complexity as well, because you could kind of say, well, surely a visitor can only leave 1 review, and that's true, that's 1 review per stay, but they can leave tons of different reviews. And so that's the kind of decision you would have to make if you were building Airbnb. You know, is my review related to the stay, or is it related to the apartment, or is it just related to the visitor, i.e. the visitor can leave as many as they like? Am I going to control that at the database with a relationship, or am I just going to have some sort of check on my app and the workflow that says if the visitor tries to leave 1 more review, tell them no, you can't do that. So this is where you start to get into the infinite options of building software. There really is tons of different ways to do it, and so you can look at this, and especially if you've got any experience in anything technical already, you might look at this and say, there's different ways that I can think of to do it. That's brilliant, keep that in your head. If you think that, then you're starting to get this. But what I'm just trying to go through is just a simple example of how you might make that trade-off. And there's a few different things that you could do here. You know, you could in theory make it that the apartment has a relationship with the visitor, because maybe you want to have a screen where the visitor can go and see all the apartments they've stayed in before, and so as a result you need to know the apartments they've stayed in before by connecting to the apartments. You can start to get into all sorts of complexity around exactly how you do that, and that's the beauty of it, and also the pain of it. There's multiple ways to do anything that you want to do. So a few wee kind of final notes. I'm just going to move the myself down here, get me out of the way so you can read. That's not going very well. But essentially, first of all, a table can have multiple relationships at once, and that's completely okay. You know, you can have 10 tables, all of them can relate to every other single table. It can get into a real mess, and that's fine. That's okay if that's what your app needs, and that's totally fine. You know, in no code in the future, if you're really thinking about having millions of users at once, you might want to be really selective about your relationships and making sure you've only got the ones that you need, so that your database stays you know, quick and fast and efficient. At this stage where you are, you really don't need to care about that. You just need to make sure it works. It's got the relationships to do what it needs to do in the first place. Efficiency, speed, you can always worry about later, and I'm sure down the line, as more of our users get to that stage, we're going to have some videos about that. Now, as I've said, I'm just going to reiterate it one more time. Think really carefully about relationship design, because, or sorry, relationship direction, because this is where things tend to go wrong in the design. You know, make sure you've kind of mapped out exactly which table is going to be the one, exactly which one should be the many. And as I mentioned, later on, a few lessons from now, I'm going to talk you through how I do that as well. And just a final note on one-to-one relationships. Now that I've kind of talked about the other two, you're probably starting to kind of process them again a little bit. Yes, you can have a one-to-one relationship. Yes, there are good times where you would do it, but they're kind of the same as one-to-many in terms of no-code. There's not many no-code tools out there that will let you do a one-to-one, and even if they do, usually the same result can be achieved by using a one-to-many, but only ever assigning one record to it and not doing multiple. So few things to think about in there. You know, absolutely go away, have a little bit of think about that. As I say, this is going to be one of the most kind of complicated topics that we cover, and it can seem really simple, but as you start to kind of throw your own ideas, your own apps at it, it will get more and more complex, but that's okay. You know, you've got the basics. If it feels like you're getting it and it's intuitive, fantastic. If you feel like you need a little bit more practice, the best thing you can do is go on Airtable, you know, come up with an idea. Maybe it's an app idea that you've got that you're going through this course because you're trying to learn it, or maybe you want to just look at the first app on your phone. Maybe it's, I don't know, Uber, maybe it's Deliveroo, something like that. You know, imagine how the database might look, try and put that together, see if you can mesh up some of those relationships and see where you get to. We'll stop there. In the future, we're just going to start to cover workflows, how those relate to relationships, and we'll start to see how all these pillars are coming together. So thank you very much, and we'll speak again soon.